Take
And
care.
we will jump over to our last chat of today. So I'm assuming everybody in the crowd is excited to have Lukas back as a moderator for one more panel today. Look at him go, he's still got high energy. So yeah, this panel is awesome. I mean, it's sort of, earlier we did the panel about how to take your HackFS project and take it to the next step in that journey through grants or accelerators or any of that. But of course, there's a whole other side of this, which is like maybe you're just coming into this for the first time, or you're really enjoying the role that you have, but you want to kind of explore other roles. You don't just have to start a company. You can also join an existing one. So we're going to do a panel that Lukas is going to run on careers in Web3. There are a lot of tough problems, a lot of really interesting work in this space. And we are joined by Ian and Jenks, who are also kind of thinking a lot about both the problems in the space, but then also like best practices in hiring and thinking a lot about just like how Web3 is a little bit different and a little bit more interesting an environment to work in than basically anywhere else, in my opinion, at least. So why don't we just start off the panel with a bunch of bias? So there we go. Cool. So yeah, excited to have you all here, and I'll get out of the way and I'll let Lukas take it over.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jacob. Welcome again to those who are kind of still tuned in. Like Jacob said, I think what we're going to double click on in this session is, not how you take your project further, but kind of focusing on your personal growth and opportunities that either in parallel to building your own project, you could pursue, or as an alternative, right? So I just want to really broaden the aperture and make you guys aware of all the opportunities that may arise from this event in any sort of way, and shine a light on that. This won't be a technical talk, but hopefully it will be enjoyable nonetheless. Not sure how many technical folks we have in the audience. But yeah, but as we jump in, the first thing I'd like to do is kind of introduce our panelists. So we have Jenks, who's on the developer advocates team, and who I'm sure you will interact with a lot over the course of the next weeks if you have questions. And Ian from the recruiting team of Protocol Labs, and he's repping the Protocol Labs shirt there, which is great. Jenks and Ian, maybe I'll let you guys just kind of introduce yourselves, and I'd be curious for you guys to highlight a little bit what your kind of previous career steps were very quickly, right? Like just kind of tapping onto them, and then how long you've been in the Web3 space, and then we'll probably double click on that transition and how you navigated it, and ultimately what kind of tips and recommendations you would give to folks. So Jenks, I'll kick it over to you. What was your pre-Web3 life, and how did you make the transition, and when did you make the transition? Thank you both for joining.
Thank you, Lukas. You make Web3 sound like a second life, but it kind of felt like that. My name is Jenks. I'm a developer advocate at Filecoin Foundation. For those who don't know, Filecoin is decentralized data storage network, one of the world's largest decentralized one. My job is to evangelize the relevant technology to the developer community on a daily basis, that participate hackathons like this one, look after builders engagement, and work on open source projects. I like to help developers to become superhumans. In my previous life, I worked in telecommunication industry, Ericsson specifically, a Swedish company, and also I worked in a SaaS company called Zero. It's an accounting software, and also I work for a tool called Linktree. They're powering the creator community, and my Web3 life is about 5 months old now. Over to you, Ian.
Awesome. Nice to meet you all, and thanks for having me today. Ian Brunner, joined as the head of talent here at Protocol Labs back in October of last year, although it feels like I've been here for 10 years, so I definitely resonate with that second life comment, Jenks. And before this, I was at Facebook for 4 years, so basically the antithesis of Web3, and we can talk a little bit more about that as to sort of the reasons why I'm passionate passionate about this space and have moved into Web3 and decentralization. And prior to my 4 years at Facebook, leading teams was at a company called Centro in the ad tech industry, basically helping them build a technology completely from scratch. But yeah, I think they've rebranded as Basis now, but they were Centro back when I worked for them. But yeah, just really happy to be here and excited to talk to you guys today.
Awesome. Thanks so much to both of you. Let's just like jump right in there. You kind of said like you're coming from a space that's kind of the antithesis of what Web3 is about. And I'm curious, when you have now looking back, or when you have conversations with people who are still in that space, like what is some of the things that they're most, I guess, looking for, and maybe, you know, like, or in two ways, right? You could look at what you're doing currently and like what are the biggest frustrations, and then looking onwards, like what is the thing that they're really looking for and excited to get out of potential next steps. What would you say, Ian?
Yeah, I can speak to that for sure. So I think one of the things that we hear constantly with any candidate coming from Web 2 or comparable industries or areas is that just the growth opportunities are just really incremental in those spaces, because you have these large companies, lots of different people moving towards similar goals, even if their teams are smaller. So just really sort of incremental growth and not a lot of sort of greenfield areas in some companies to really dive in and build things completely from scratch. So we talked to a lot of candidates, a lot of my friends I talked to that are just interested in this space because there's so much to build and so much to just create completely from scratch. That's really, to me, what's the most exciting thing about this space, Web3, is that there's just so much greenfield, so much to build from scratch. I say to everyone that listens to me say it, that I've learned more here since October than I did in 4 years at Facebook. And I truly mean that. It's been just supercharging my knowledge in all these different ways that have been super, super exciting. So that's just a few things that I would note.
Cool, awesome, thanks so much. And I think, Jenks, you're like one of the reasons, you're one of those people that are like helping people really accelerate on that learning trajectory. And I'm kind of curious, like if maybe you could share an anecdote or two of somebody you met, who you interacted with on Discord, on, you know, any of in the community forums, who really like, who you were helping with something, and just kind of like sharing a little bit of what kind of challenges you helped them with, because I'd like to basically get folks to understand what it is that you can help them with, and what parts of their journey you could basically help them accelerate.
Yeah, sure. So working in ecosystem team and with a very vibrant community, you have lots of good things going on, and sometimes there are things that's a little bit annoying. But most people are building awesome projects. So my job is there to help them to succeed technically. I can't even mention the 1 or 2 projects, because I've reviewed so many hackathon projects myself, and every day there's a grant submission and people pinging me for giving them technical advice or just how to write a better grant. And I've been helping them, and seeing them getting approved, getting the fund that they needed to take their project to reality has been very satisfying. I'll keep doing that. I watch the community threads every Monday. Is my shift to watch all of the Slack channels. I have about 5 or 6 Slack, the chatting softwares on my computer right now that I watch regularly every day. So the question could be like very random. A question could be technically related. The question could also be business related. I answer them all because of my background has technical stuff, but also a little bit of business facing stuff as well. Yeah, so I love the challenge. It's challenging sometimes, but also I'm learning heaps from talking to people.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like diving into maybe like some of those differences, right? Like I guess like a lot of the ways that people interact with each other is often even using Web 2 tools, right? Like you'll still be on Telegram, you'll still be on Discord. Those aren't yet decentralized services. And I'm kind of curious, like, are there any ways that, you know, like in how we interact that is different in Web3 than maybe in another world? And Ian, both from a perspective of, roles and recruiting, right? Maybe we double click on that. And then also just like in terms of connecting with folks. So like on the recruiting side, I guess like my background, and maybe just to share that, right? Like I also come from a very kind of conventional business background where I worked at a company called BCG that does consulting. And I only knew recruiting through LinkedIn, and then at school there would be maybe a career fair or something. Web3 doesn't have that really, so I'm kind of curious, like Ian, what are the forums where you would learn about these opportunities? Like where would I go to find out what might be an interesting role, and yeah, how do people learn about it?
Yeah. So it's in many ways, it's sort of the opposite of Web2, or I guess industries that you were sort of referring to there, Lucas, because a lot of times in Web2, people sort of search out opportunities. Like, I want to be a software engineer. Let's see what sort of software engineer opportunities are available to me. Now in Web3, it's more about like figuring out what sort of projects or what sort of companies are interesting to you, and then like putting your foot in the door and seeing if there's something there that you can work on. That's something that's really, really cool about Web3, and certainly is the case at Protocol Labs. Is sure, we have positions posted, but we also create positions for the right people. So there's plenty of people that we talk to where it's like, we don't have a job posting open, but like, this sounds like an amazing skill set that could be influential at this spot. So it's sort of really seeking out projects, seeking out individuals that you admire, are working on really cool things, seeing what else they're working on. I know Danny before this in the last talk talked a lot about trust, and like it really comes down to sort of figuring out that trust or credibility with companies too, because there's a lot of noise in this space too, unfortunately. It's like figuring out who's working on legitimate projects, what's cool in the space, who's partnering with really awesome companies, and then sort of like working backwards from there to see what sort of opportunities there are. If there isn't an opportunity listed that's like right in your skill set, like reaching out to the project teams and seeing like, hey, here's my skill set. Is there something I can work on for you guys, whether it's a contract role or full time? So I think what I'm getting at it as a whole here, Lucas, is like there's a lot more flexibility in Web3 and a lot more sort of looking at people's aptitude and potential as opposed to just making sure they 100% have 10 years of job experience or whatever the traditional job description for a software engineer would have. So yeah, that's just a few things I would note.
Well, that's awesome. And I actually do know of one guy who was just contributing, because all of these are open source projects, right? They were just contributing and then eventually made the jump over. And so you can even live on the edge of being kind of like formally associated with the project and not being formally associated. And so I think there's even different types of being engaged that very much mirror whatever you feel most comfortable with, right? You don't have to drop everything and like start this job and spend 40 hours or whatever it is per week on doing it. You can also kind of find like softer ways, and I think that's something that in the old world maybe doesn't work as well. We can say, hey, like I'm gonna just hang around in the channel for a while and kind of see what's going on. Yeah, what are, Jenks, maybe like switching over to you, like what are some of the things that you think when you're involved in some of these projects, right? Like in through one of the roles that Ian was describing, or in kind of a semi-formal way where you're just contributing to the open source way, what are the channels, what are the forums where people are engaging? Would that be GitHub? Would that be Discord? Just kind of curious, like where does the community meet and where do people find each other?
These days is mainly Discord, and we, because of the Filecoin project history, we have a very Slack-focused community, Slack channel, and I think it's because our project is quite technical, and a lot of different parties will like to use Slack to communicate because they're all pretty much developers. That's been the major places, and it is true that these tools are Web2 centralized, very centralized tools. But Web2 has its places, of course, and then Web3 is just starting, it's young, right? I predict when we have a Web3 decentralized app installed in our phones and use it every day, that's when Web3 has made it. We're all waiting for that moment, right? Anyways, I'll speak a little bit about the experience in working in Web3 as someone who joined just a few months ago. Compared to the previous workplaces that I have been to, Web3 is default to open. right? Very, very, very drastically different. You don't need permissions to get involved. What Ian said was great. Like, you can get involved. Lucas said as well. That's how we hired Discordian from our team. Like, he was just working on IPFS open source project he's been contributing, and a caught the eye of some people at Protocol Labs, and he got hired as a developer advocate, and that's the best job, according to him, has ever had. This is one of the best jobs I've had as well. There are literally hundreds of ways to get started. I can speak on behalf of some technical audience because of my development background. I really recommend start following and learning about projects that you know, or people who follow them, and then you like those people because you know them, and then the projects that follow. Start by getting involved in that way, just looking at community threads, chatters, and then getting involved in their education program, attend public meetings, follow them on Discord, target your interest project to look for opportunities that way, because you really need to get excited about that project and get behind the mission, to have the passion to contribute your working hours to it. So get involved in open source project. If you're technical, you can start your own project, join hackathons, propose grants, applications, and run with it. And you'll get noticed by the people in the project if you're active enough. In most of them, you don't need to rubber stamp to get involved. The same goes for product people and business people. I believe there are ways to contribute other than coding. The second thing is broaden your network. That's what I did myself as well. For Filecoin, when I was interviewing, I just reach out to people in the Slack channel and say, hey, can I have a 15 minutes or 30 minutes to validate something with you, because this is all new to me. And they're open. Everyone is open for it because they're used to working in an open way. We're in a funny area because we're going through market cycle right now. So it actually helps with technical people because it gets rid of people who are looking for just hype and opportunity to make quick money. This will give us more opportunity to meet good people who are down to earth building right now. So I encourage you to get involved in projects, but also building a network by just chatting to people.
Awesome, thanks so much. I feel like I'm in one of those tele-sales commercials. So it's like, hey, why do you think your job is so amazing? And it's the best job ever. And Ian is like, I've learned so much over the past few months. So that's great. And I'm honestly I would second that. But I would also it also is challenging, right? And it is different, and it takes a lot of adjusting to do. So I'm curious, maybe to now that we understand that it's all fantastic and fun, I'm curious, what are some of the challenges, Ian, that somebody who is new to this space and faced with all this abundance of opportunity and openness, what are some of the things that might make the adjustment a little harder? What are some of the things where you're okay, that's actually a little tough here or a little challenging? Yeah. And you can still frame it in positive terms if we want to keep this a commercial, but yeah, just kind of let's shine a light on both sides.
Yeah, no, there's tons of things that are challenging about the space too, especially coming from a large company like Facebook or any company that's larger. There's a lot of differences that can be challenging. The first one that I think is most obvious, or at least I experienced, was just the completely async nature of how projects and work get done. At Facebook, I was going into an office multiple times a week and seeing people face to face and having candid conversations. But here it's you need to drive things forward with people across the world. I work with people in New Zealand, Brazil, Germany, US, everywhere. So just really being able to push projects forward in a completely async manner like that is definitely challenging if you haven't experienced that before. The other thing too is just really getting comfortable with the tools as well that need to be used async to push things forward. Notion, I had no exposure to prior to going to Protocol Labs. I use it every single day, multiple times now. Yeah, Slack, Discord, Twitter, everything that is just really sort of central to this space that I didn't utilize on a regular basis at Facebook or any of my previous companies is also definitely a hurdle. I'd say the other thing too, or the third thing is at a company like Facebook, or again, traditional companies, there's projects have sort of like longer life cycles. It's generally like, okay, there's 3 to 4 months of planning, there's a month of like getting stakeholder buy-in from everybody involved, and then finally after 6 months you can ship something. At Protocol Labs, and I know this is the case at other companies that we partner with in this space too, it's sort of the traditional startup mentality that if you're not like embarrassed by the first thing that you shipped, you waited too long to ship it. So it's very much like pushing things out the door and getting projects done as soon as possible to have something to work with, as opposed to waiting until something is like completely polished. And I think that sort of like startup mentality or like builder mentality, you know, if someone's worked in traditional Web2 startups, they're going to have that. But for people like me that are coming from larger companies, was definitely a learning curve, but is also what supercharged my learning here. Like I mentioned earlier, Lucas, it's been great to be able to jump in and sort of take on as many different projects, and the scope of things that I've worked on has been really incredible. So that's 3 things that I would note.
Well, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And Jenks, same question for you. What are, you know, as a developer, maybe specifically in the engineering space, right? Like beyond kind of the meta comment of coordination, things like, what are some of the challenges in coding with Web3 technology, right? Like one of the things that I could imagine, but I'll let you speak to it, is like the fact that a lot of the tools are underdeveloped or undeveloped, right? So you're like constantly hitting like black spots on the map, and you're like, oh, like I wish somebody had built this. I guess not. So I'm curious, like what are some of the frustrations that you encounter when you join a space that, you know, is growing, accelerating, and you know, like seeing this tremendous momentum, but is still early, right? So like from an engineering perspective, from a developer perspective, what are some of the frustrations that you're seeing?
So if you ask any developer's frustration, it will be like documentation. There's no documentation about things, and that's true, very true in Web3. Like even in Web2 tools, like people don't document, because I used to write those documents. It doesn't have everything in there. But I was warned by this before I joined. So I spoke to Ali, which is another developer advocate who joined Filecoin just a few months before me. And she says, well, all the tools are clunky, you know, rusty, and they're new. It doesn't have everything. It's not like developing in with mature tools in Web3. And I know that. And one of the amazing things in Web3 is if it's missing, if the equivalence is missing, you can go and build it. And people often give you money, funding to actually build it, as long as it has some real value. The challenge I have is learning, right? Learning speed is just not enough. You need to get things down. Thank God there's async work only, like here. I don't have a lot of meetings that are reduced from like having 10 meetings a day in my previous job, like getting nothing done, but just talking and coordinating things, to like nearly like 1 or 2 meetings a day. And I have a bunch of time to do focus time. So my productivity has improved a lot as a developer advocate, as someone in DevRel. But learning takes a lot of time. I need to contribute about 1 to 2 hours, just like heads down, learning about projects that I have heard in conferences and in general news, keep following with their updates, and also learning technology. I'm still reading Filecoin specification. I haven't finished that yet, and I need to know that like the back of my hand. So that's the challenge I have. But at the same time, like in this job, I've never been so well trained. After I started, I had about 1 month self-paced learning, and then I joined the Protocol Labs Network Launchpad program, which was a 6 weeks, pretty much a full-time training program. And I flew to Amsterdam to have collocation week with the people who I learned together, and that was the best experience of my life. One of the books, working in Web3 is a very unique experience, work experience wise. It's I enjoyed it very much, but it could be strange to someone. There's one book written by Nadia Ebo, I think that's the last name, and the book is called Working in Public. The book was mainly talking about working in open source community and how to deal with difficult or colorful developers around the world. There are a lot of challenges in Web3, I think is very similar to this. I'll close that at that point and allow other topics to go on.
Great. And I love that, like while we were trying to shine a light on some of the difficulties, still I heard something like was the best experience of my life. So anyways, like we're doing our best. I think like one thing that I'll add is like I come from an organization that was like very hierarchical in a way. And honestly, I kind of like, I liked it. I didn't think like there's a lot of benefits to that, right? You can move fast, you can make decisions fast, and things just happen. They might happen the wrong way, but they happen. I think in Web3, you have, and maybe like I'll reference these like graph structures, right? Like you have a lot organizationally, you have what looks like a directed acyclic graph where one, like, a daughter of something can have multiple parents organizationally, right? So like Jenks worked for the Filecoin Foundation, which is a different legal entity than the legal entity that I work for. Still, Jenks and I interface a lot, like, frequently during the week. So it adds an interesting dynamic where people from different organizations, sometimes with somewhat different cultures and different expectations, come together and need to kind of almost like negotiate a working model on a very frequent basis. So you can't just be like, hey, I work at this company and I kind of know what's going on. No, like you're constantly renegotiating who spends their time on what. And I think that's like one of the other challenges that I definitely see, but that are also kind of fun to work through. Yeah, it's like a two sides of the coin. Cool. I would love.
It was definitely an experience to report to someone that is outside of my organization. Like I've never had that before. Michelle is in Protocol Labs, and you're in Protocol Labs, and I work with you quite a bit. One of the things that I have a really good manager, Michelle Lee is awesome. And this is not brown nosing because she's not even in this meeting at all. One of the things that she said to me after repetitively asking for permission to do stuff, and she says, Jenks, stop asking for permissions. As long as your core target is finished, you can get involved in anything. I was like, wow, this is good. I don't know about Ian, like, did you have that moment coming from a big corporation before, where you need to get like 7 people approval to go for a business trip?
100%. The basically exact same thing happened for me joining Protocol Labs, where it was just, refreshing to, not have to cut through all the red tape to get stuff done, and just like, go forth and make it happen. So it was really refreshing to work in the environment here.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think this is, I don't know, I find it helpful. I hope it's helpful for folks out there. I don't think I'll keep us around much longer. What I would love to hear from both of you is like maybe a few resources, right? And that can be places to go, like actually go and look, right? Like what's a website that you should go and check out? What's a book that you should read? What's a podcast that you should listen to? Or something just like very specific. Next steps, like after this call, from like, hey, that does kind of sound interesting. I'd like to explore some opportunities here. Like, what are maybe two or three resources very specifically that you would recommend to check out after this call?
Yeah.
And I'll start with you, Ian.
Awesome. I think the first one that I definitely want to plug, Jenks actually referenced, which is our Launchpad program here at Protocol Labs. We have cohorts going off throughout the entire year, 6-week program, supercharging people's knowledge and Web3, and specifically our ecosystem or network. And honestly, like every single cohort, we make more and more improvements to it, more and more cool aspects to it. So definitely, if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me. We have postings on our site. There's a website for it. Hit me up on Twitter, LinkedIn, or anywhere, and I'm more than happy to chat about it and get you in touch with the right people to potentially be considered for it. But yeah, that Launchpad program is really awesome, and it not only connects you to opportunities at Protocol Labs, but also, as you guys were talking about the collaboration of this space, our whole network of companies that build in our space. So I think there's like 50 companies plugged in right now, but we plug in 10 to 15 more for every single cohort. In terms of like other resources, I guess I'll call out one that I like recently have found really interesting. A16Z has a new podcast that's like specific to blockchain, Web3, crypto. They've had, I think, 3 episodes, and each of them have been like super, super informative for me to listen to. But a lot of the other ones I listen to, it's like just more one-off episodes where I'll see someone on Twitter post like, oh, this one's really informative with these two people, and I'll listen to that. But I guess A16Z's recent crypto podcast is one that I have really enjoyed, so I'd recommend that too.
Cool, great. So a podcast and kind of like the job spot and the launchpad. For maybe let me just plug there. If you go to hackathons.filecoin.io and you go to the section that's called post hackathon opportunities, you will find links to both information about the launchpad program as well as the job spot that Ian was describing. So I encourage you to check that out. And Jenks, over to you. We already heard the book tip for working in public to kind of like get a little bit of a sense for what's going on. What are some other resources that you would recommend?
I'm a big podcast listener, like before I had children, and now I have no time to listen to podcasts. But thankfully, I do fly business trips sometimes, so I have plenty of time to finish audiobooks and stuff while on an airplane. One of the things, the gateway podcast for me to crypto and Web3 world is Panelist. And they have a segments called roll-ups, which are really good. It was like a flash news for Web3. So from there, I used to not understand 80% or even 90% of what they're talking about. And then I learn, right? Every day, spend 1 or 2 hours. What's this project? What does that do? And where are they at? And to now, like I can understand there's only probably about 20% of things that I don't understand. So that's a good way to learn. Apart from the working in public, which is about ways of working in Web3, the Infinite Machine is talking about how Ethereum is funded, the stories, the good parts, and also the not so good parts. That was good, very educating, and it talked about so many projects that are very famous in the history of Web3 world. And Filecoin was talked about as well, and very in a very impartial way. The Crypto King is another book that talks about Coinbase and how they started. And in that book, they referred to a few projects financially related too. And to close on this is I'm going to give you advice, which is going to be either the best career advice you'll hear or you'll forget right after this panel, is don't change yourself for a job. But find a job that suits you, be choosy and absolutely selfish to you. Because if you find a job that energizes you, if you find a job that you really like, then you don't feel like working. And that's what I have been feeling like for the last 2 jobs, and including this one as well, which is getting into DevRel. This is a space where technical meets kind of business skills together and community skills and marketing together. And I've been not feeling like working for, honestly, like for six years or so. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for both for kind of sharing those tips. And since you're both like too humble to mention yourselves, I'm going to do it, right? So you have Ian and you have Jenks sitting right here, and you know, they are available on Twitter, on Discord, etc. So please do reach out to them. Same applies for me. We are here to kind of support you in whatever, you know, way your journey may take you, right? If you want to start your own company, and we talked about the opportunities around that earlier, and then also, you know, your personal growth goals. So super exciting to hear that from you about those opportunities. I think we'll just kind of close out there. I have one thing that I heard earlier that Juan said, which was like figure out how to accelerate your own learning pace, which I think is great advice. I hadn't heard it, and I think that's really key. And like, what does it specifically mean, right? Because Ian also said it, there is a lot of noise in the space. Like, just connect with people and ask that you trust and think that they have something valid to say, and they will be able to direct you, right? So you don't reinvent the wheel. There have been people who have been in the space and they're trying to make sense of it for a while. Just reach out to them, use them as signposts, and help them navigate through the space. With that, like, thanks so much, Ian and Jenks, for joining the panel and sharing some of your perspectives and insight. And I'll hand it back over to Jacob. Thanks so much.
And awesome. Big thank you to Lukas too for leading the panel and as a moderator, and for all the help that Lukas also had in playing a role in this entire summit. So I really appreciate the help there. And thanks, Ian and Jenks. Awesome. Love your ideas and your thoughts in the space. So Thank you so much for being here.
You bet. My pleasure.